She has worked extensively with WordPress sites and teaches SEO on Udemy.
Thank you.
Kathy, take it away.
Yeah. So if you want to drive an SEO crazy, pick up the phone and say something like this. Hey, we've made all these changes to our site, and so what happened to all our web traffic? So after having several of those conversations, that was kind of the inspiration for this talk. And yeah, with a little bit of planning and a little bit of knowledge, you can avoid a lot of problems. My name is Kathy Alice Brown. I'm an SEO consultant. And of course, SEO is the search engine optimization. It's the art and science of ranking well in Google. I teach SEO on Udemy. And I've been known to build WordPress sites, although it's been a while, so I know enough WordPress to be dangerous. Okay, so, when I approached doing this talk, and given that we only have about 30, 40 minutes, I've kind of crammed a bunch of stuff in. And, migration and redesign can mean a lot of different things. And so I'm going to try to touch on a lot of the different ones, but I'm going to focus a little bit more on the cases where your domain is changing or your URLs are changing. But that's the thing to start asking yourself. If you're going to make changes to your site, what are you changing? Are you rebranding? Are you moving to a new domain? Are you doing a redesign? Okay, Kathy, what does redesign a site have anything to do with SEO? Well, if on your old e-commerce site you had your sizing chart in an HTML table, and now it's an image, well, that's not as helpful for SEO. And for those of you who are developers, I say be really careful with putting things behind tabs and accordions. Now, Google has said that as they transition to mobile-first indexing, these should be less of an issue, but we haven't really seen evidence of that yet. So, because a lot of sites, what I'm seeing now, they're going from the really long page to kind of tabs and accordions. So make sure that your most important content is still visible when the user lands on the page. Information architecture. Maybe you've been in business 3 years and your site is 3 years old. And since you've been in business, like you're a service provider, you realize there's these 3 questions everybody asks about your service. So you say, well, maybe I should create pages for those 3 questions and feature them prominently on my site. And of course, the very key question, if you're going to migrate your site to another domain or you're just kind of moving things around, are your URLs changing? Because if they are, there's definitely some things you need to be aware of. And are pages going away, or are you creating new pages? And then finally, because Google has now made htaccess a ranking factor, it's not a major ranking factor, but it's still a ranking factor, I have a couple of notes on this as well. So Google's kind of like a cranky child or cranky old man. I mean, if you say, okay, we're going to change the domain, we're going to change all the URLs, we're going to redesign the whole website and the information, Google's going to kind of have a heart attack or get really cranky because it has a notion of your site. And if you make all these changes, it's going to take it a while to process those changes and trust those changes. Because as you all know, there's hackers out there and that sort of thing. And so Google wants to be confident that if someone searches and it sends them to your page, because you're in the search engine results, that user is still going to have a good experience. And so if you're changing a lot of stuff all at once, it may not have that trust factor. We'll talk just a bit more about that a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to run through some things to think about before you make changes. So how many of you know your top organic pages? This is good. I sometimes ask this question and people go, well, how do I even find that information out? So top organic pages are, of course, the pages that Google is sending the most traffic to. But, also you should be aware of which of your pages have high quality backlinks too. So those are kind of things to figure out. With a lot of sites, it's the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the traffic goes to 20% of your pages. So those pages are gold. You should treat them with care, and you have to think very carefully before you start messing with them too much. Identify any orphan pages, and by orphan I mean you have pages that are just not linked into a site. This is less common with WordPress, but I had a client who had gone through redesign and migration to CMSs and then another migration, and they had pages that were not linked into their site that were getting traffic and did have backlinks. So just, you know the history of your site, so ask yourself that question. And if you don't know kind of what you rank for or what you're getting traffic for, identifying your top keywords, because you want to make sure that what you were ranking for now, you're going to be ranking for after you make changes. And finally, if you've never done keyword research or any market research, this would probably be a good time to do some of that, because you might have opportunities in front of you that you could take advantage of by creating some new pages. When I work on a migration or a redesign, typically I'll do an SEO site audit because it's often a good idea to clean up any kind of SEO issues, specifically on-page issues, before you actually do the changes. And I just have a couple things here, but one thing, and I don't know, maybe someone can tell me, but the last time I looked at Yoast, it had great defaults for indexation, but it tended to generate sitemaps for everything, even if those pages were no index. So you want to clean up your XML sitemaps, make sure the pages in those sitemaps are valid pages, they're indexable, they're not broken, and they're not redirecting. And you might want to take a look at your robots.txt, especially if you've changed it, something that WordPress generates for you on the fly, and it's usually just fine, but people mess with it, so it's usually a good idea to check that. And this might be a good time to trash low-quality pages. If you've never deleted Hello World, that toast, maybe that would be a good time. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, the more pages I have in the Google index, the better. No, that's not true. You want your best pages. It's kind of like putting your best foot forward. So if you have a lot of pages that have just not that much content, are not that useful, have broken, images and links, that can pull down the performance of your site. So it's probably time to clean that up. And a great time to do that is before making major changes. So before, and this is particularly for migration, you're going to either, move it to a new host or change the URLs or change the domain. You want to back up your existing site. I mean, this is, 101, but I've been guilty of forgetting to do this, so just wanted to put it out there. And of course, there's plugins, and there's a codex on how to do that. And then you want to crawl your existing site. And what I mean by crawl is there's tools out there that will actually start at your home page and file in all the links and actually discover all the pages you have on your site. And I'll show you an example of one in a moment. And then you're going to take that list of your existing pages, and this is if you're changing your URLs, and create a mapping from old page to new page. Because this is not what you want to do to Google. Now, a lot of people think, oh, what Google does is it comes to the home page and it crawls through the site and it finds all the pages, and that's all true. But when Google knows about a page, it will actually come and revisit that page individually. So if that page is moved, you need to tell Google where that new page is. So this is what you don't want to do. So if I say a 301 redirect, how many of you know what I'm talking about? Oh, quite a bit of the room. Okay, I'll just really briefly say what it is. So when you request a page from the web server, it will send back a status code. We call this the HTTP status code. And it can be 200. Here's your page. Have a great day. It can be 404. I can't find your page. Or it can be that page has been moved to a new location. And there's 2 redirect codes. Well, actually, it's more than that, but I'm going to talk about 2. There's 301, which means the page has permanently moved to the new location. And then there's 302, which is a temporary move. Now, with 302s, you might get away with it, but the Google's behavior on which page it puts in the index is kind of undefined. It kind of makes a choice for you. So if you want your new page in the index to replace the old page, the old URL, then you want to use a 301 redirect. So you got that list of your existing URLs. You want to set up a mapping. Excel spreadsheet works great. Okay, this is my old URL. This is my new URL. And you want to set up a 301 redirect between the old URL to the new URL. It's okay to 404 pages of low quality, as I've just said. And avoid redirect changes. So, sites that have kind of been around for a while, had a lot of pages move around, you'll find that, 301 redirects, 301 redirects, 301 redirects. Each time that redirects, it's a cost in performance, not only just for Googlebot, but for the user. The user, it's going to take longer for that page to come up for the user. And Google has been known not to follow very long redirect changes. So 1 redirect if you can. I'm kind of getting back to the information architecture kind of side of things. So this is a sort of a composite graph of a client's organic traffic. And when the line goes down, that's not good. It means that the traffic's gone down. And this client made a lot of mistakes, but here is what I want to share with you. Their old site did really well for what I'm going to call top of the funnel keywords. So these are keywords, when you're like searching on maybe digital camera, you start with digital camera, then maybe you start with Nikon camera, then you start with, and so on. So top of the funnel is when people are first kind of figuring things out and learning about things. And in this case, this client sells a learning management system for schools, which doesn't get a lot of searches on it, but what gets a lot of searches are teachers looking for help with adopting technology in their classrooms. So things like blended learning and flipped classroom, and anyway, you get the point. And they had pages that talked about these terms. And guess what? Those pages, they didn't account for those pages in the new site. They didn't look and see what their top organic pages were. And so their new site was very beautiful and had the benefits and the features and a couple of testimonials, but it didn't really address the people kind of just beginning the journey of learning how to use technology in the classroom. So those old pages either 404'd or they redirected to the top blog page. And that Google doesn't want to see that, because if someone's searching on flipped classroom and then they land on a page that doesn't even talk about a flipped classroom, and then someone starts bouncing off or they don't stay on the site very long, Google notices that kind of stuff and you lose your traffic. So one of the reasons to really understand kind of how people use your site and what they find interesting on your site. So it's kind of a case study. Okay, so I talked about crawling a site to build your list of URLs. This is a tool called Screaming Frog, and if you Google it, you will get to the site. It's actually a British company. It's a tool you can download. It runs on your desktop. It does run on both PC and Mac. And I know this might be a little bit hard to see, but basically what you do is you pop in, www.foo.com, click the start. It'll go and crawl the site just like Google does. And then over where you see that number 2, if you click on the internal tab, filter on HTMLs, and then hit the export, you'll get a list of all the URLs it found on your site. So very cool tool, and we'll be revisiting it. And it is both free and paid, and for the free version, it will crawl up to 500 URLs. So kind of an interesting tool and very useful for these situations. I mentioned topped organic pages, and I know there's plugins and things that will give you analytics, but in Google Analytics, this is how I do it. And there's multiple ways to do this, but this is one. You need to just understand the difference between all pages and landing pages. All pages are like, someone can land on that page after they've looked at other pages. Landing pages are pages that someone's landed on coming from somewhere else, whether that's a social media post or whether that's a search engine or and even an email. So if you go to Google Analytics, you navigate to behavior, then landing pages, and then Google Analytics has this thing called segments. So if you look at the segment view, the default is going to be all users, but if you click on organic traffic and then unclick all users, you will then get a list of all your pages that got organic traffic. And of course, the top ones that get the most traffic will be first. And this is something you can export. Okay, let's talk about redirects, because there's a lot of ways. Actually, there's several ways you can implement redirects. And the way that you want to implement your redirect is going to depend on the scenario. So this is in Bluehost, and so you can actually set up a redirect in your cPanel as long as the name servers, the DNS name servers for that domain actually point to that hosting account. So what I've done here is I had a single page website. It was this old HTML site. It wasn't mobile friendly, and I didn't feel like building another one. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to put a page on this other site, and that's already responsive. It's already in WordPress, and I'm just going to set up a redirect. So I just did this in the cPanel. And so for domains, if you have to redirect domain, this might be one option you might want to take a look at. A couple things is, again, make sure it's a 301, not a 302, and make sure that you're not forwarding. So I think GoDaddy in particular, I've noticed this, but it's definitely true on a couple of other hosting accounts. If you select forwarding, it's cool in some ways because it kind of masks the URL, but if you look at the source code, what it really is doing is just like an iframe where it pulls in the site, and don't do it. It's not good for SEO. You can use plugins. The screenshot here is from an older plugin named Simple 301 Redirects that happened to be on the site that I was looking at. The redirection plugin is pretty popular and pretty well regarded and has a bit more features than this. But you remember I was talking about that mapping. You are taking the old URL and you're doing a 301 redirect to the new URL. And so there's an example of a map, where I have /ninja and I'm 301 redirecting it to /3-ninja.tips. Just make sure it's a 301 redirect, unless it's truly a temporary redirect. I mean, that's okay, but you need to just make sure you know what you're selecting fits the scenario you're talking about. This is just an example of htaccess. So if you have a lot of redirects, it can be more performant to implement an htaccess. And of course, htaccess is particular to the Apache web server. If you're using IIS, which is the Microsoft web server, it's going to be a different thing. But this is just an example I pulled. This client was moving from a Cold Fusion site to WordPress. The blurred part is his domain, and I'm just preserving his anonymity. And this is just an example of single redirects as well as wildcard redirects. So you can set it up so that if it matches a pattern, it does a redirect. When you get into htaccess, sometimes you may have to play with it or do a little bit of research, because I've noticed just little nuances from host to host. So sometimes they deal with it differently. So don't take this as gospel. It's just this was what worked on his host. Okay, HTTP to HTTPS. So, If you haven't already, and I still have sites, I'm guilty, I still have sites on HTTP. If you haven't moved to HTTPS, you should. It's not just that Google's pushing it, it's also good for the user, it's more secure. Everybody knows what HTTPS is? And so HTTPS just means it secures the connection between the browser and the web server. So it's time to move. These are two plugins that I have not really done my due diligence on, but they're recommended by blogs that I trust. So this may be a good place to start if you want to do it using a plugin, because you are going to need to redirect all the HTTP URLs that you used to serve under to HTTPS. So you do need that redirect. Or you might want to do it in the htaccess file, which is probably how I'm going to do the next site that I do. But the other thing you do need to do is now you have all these links on your site, whether they're links to other pages or links to images, and they're all going to be HTTP. You want to change those to HTTPS, and there's this very handy plugin, I have it on the next slide, called Better Search Replace. And it will go and find, the old URLs and change them to the new URLs. And that's also useful in the case that you're migrating to a new domain, or, if you have some other general change, like maybe you're moving from a flat information architecture where you have some folders. So this is a very handy plugin, used it several times, it works great. But yeah, the point I kind of want to make here is if you have internal links, your redirect should pick it up and handle it so the user gets to the right place. But why send the user in Googlebot through a 301 redirect when you can fix the link to just go directly to the target? So if you have that opportunity to fix it, you should. All right, the move. So Duplicator Pro is a plugin. It is both a free and a premium version. It works great on smaller sites. I've used it several times. If you have a really large site with a lot of media, you might run into problems. You might, because the plugin has to kind of talk to the web server, and sometimes depending on the hosting account, it'll like time you out. And so you might have to do it by hand, but I think for most people's sites, Duplicator Pro works, so you can check that out. If you're changing a domain name, just be aware, changing domain, but also if you're changing where your name servers are pointing, let's say you're moving from one hosting account to another, just be aware that the DNS name servers, any changes to those take 24 hours to propagate. So the way DNS works, it's just not one centralized DNS kind of server. There's like servers all over the world, and so any changes kind of have to kind of propagate out to all the servers across the world. You can change this for those of you who are a bit more geeky. There's a thing called time to live. That's what that TTL is, and you can make it a shorter propagation time. Something you might want to check out. And I mentioned Better Search Replace already. Okay, so we moved, we're in the process of moving. So what's a checklist that we might want to look at? So how many of you know about Google Search Console? Okay, a lot of you, great. How many of you looked at the new Google Search Console? Yeah, there's some good stuff in there. So if you're moving to a new domain or you're moving to HTTPS, you will need to create a new profile for that new site in Google Search Console. Google Search Console, it's kind of annoying, but it actually thinks that HTTPS and www versus non-www are actually separate, so you have to have a profile for the exact site that you're tracking. So if your site is https://food.com, not www.food.com, so you have a canonical redirect back to food.com, that's exactly what you need to type in when you set up your Google Search Console profile. And oh, by the way, if you haven't moved yet and you don't have a Google Search Console set up on your existing site, that might be a good idea, because Google Search Console is a conduit of information from Google to you. And there's all sorts of useful information in Google Search Console. Right now there's two. There's a new Google Search Console and an old one. They're both available. They're both running side by side. And Google's not done with the new Search Console yet. So some features are not in the new Search Console. They're still in the old one. So sometimes you might want to look at both. You want to crawl the old URLs. So remember that list we created? You want to kind of pop that back into Screaming Frog, and I have a screenshot on that in a moment. And you want to actually run that list through Screaming Frog and see what the results are. Are all the URLs I cared about and then the pages I moved, did they redirect? Or do I have broken links? When you have your new site and if you've changed your new URLs, make sure you've submitted your new XML sitemap to Google Search Console. Everybody know what an XML sitemap is? Okay, everybody's nodding their heads. And then after all that, I would definitely crawl the new site with Screaming Frog, just making sure there's no broken links or any kind of weirdnesses that you need to fix. And then you need to monitor and see how things go. So this is Screaming Frog again. This is a screenshot. In Screaming Frog, you can actually select a mode. So the default mode is spider. So if you put in a URL, it'll actually crawl it. But there's a list mode, and if you select that, then and it may be hard for you to see, but then there's an upload button. If you click that, then you can either upload a file, or you can copy and paste your list of URLs, and then it'll run through all those URLs, try to crawl them, and then you can see, oh, okay, I got a bunch of 200s. Well, actually, in this case, I got a bunch of 301s. I'm happy. Or, oh boy, I have a bunch of 404s. Or I have like multiple 301s. So you can use this tool to kind of check that you implemented your 301 redirects correctly. Just quickly, this is just a website. If you want to check a URL's HTTP status individually, this is a website you can go to, and you can pop it in, and it'll give you, the HTTP status code for that URL. For those of you who rather have, like a browser tool, this is the Chrome extension I use. It's IEMA Redirect Path. That is certainly not the only one. It just happens to be the one I use. Okay, so what did you break? So even if your URLs didn't change, it's important to keep an eye on things. Keep an eye on your traffic, your rankings. Google Search Console, take a look at the index coverage report, which is in the new Google Search Console, and take a look at the crawl errors in the old Google Search Console. Both of those are pretty useful. I also want to tell you about the site : command. It's actually a search operator you can put directly into your browser. So when you type in site : www.foo.com or site:/webenzo.com, no spaces, it will give you a list of all the URLs that Google knows about in your site and has indexed. So this is a site : I did on my site. I recently moved to a new hosting provider, sort of as a precursor to implementing HTTPS. For various reasons I won't get into, the site is in its own directory, so you can put WordPress in its own directory and kind of hide that. And it wasn't implemented right. So guess what? All these like upload directories, which are normally kind of hidden and should not be indexed, were indexed. And I didn't catch it right away, and I found the problem using the site : command. So using the site : command, like, on your existing site, to kind of check things out and see what Google knows about your website, and doing it post-migration is usually a good idea, even if you haven't changed any URLs, because I did not. This was just a move from one hosting provider to another that just went a bit wrong.
How do you use that command?
So you just go to your browser like Chrome and type in site : and then your domain name, no spaces. There's a lot of search operators out there. This is just one of the most useful ones. Okay, I'm going to just I have just one more slide. Expect some turbulence in the Google SERPs. It can be 2 weeks, it can be 1 week, it can be a month. It just sort of depends. And one thing I would highly recommend is, if you've changed to HTTPS, you've changed domain names, is go to your social media profiles and update the link in your social media files. If you're giving Google a signal like, oh yeah, the site, it's good, the change is good. It's not like someone hacked the site and I'm seeing that people are linking to the new site. And what we often do is we'll go look at the backlinks of the site and we'll ask the kind of high authority, top quality backlinks, those sites to update their links so that they're pointing to the new site. Yeah, thank you. And I got the signal, so I'm very happy that I'm wrapping up. Let's see, my name is Kathy Alice Brown. I blog at webinzo.com. That's my Twitter, is @KathyAlice. The slides are down at that bit.ly if you want to go ahead and grab them. I didn't sign up for a happiness bar shift, but I'm planning to just pop by around 2:30 if any of you want to take this conversation a little bit further. And that's my presentation.
Redirect maps. Are you just using Excel to create that, or is there a tool that you use specifically for that?
What I usually do is you need to figure out the disposition of all your URLs. So yeah, I usually do it in Excel. And then depending whether we're using a plugin or htaccess, then we just then take that and put it into htaccess.
Got it. And then my second question was about Duplicator Pro. I didn't quite follow exactly what that was accomplishing. And then second part to that question was, you said it works good for smaller sites. Are we talking, 500 pages and lower? Or are we talking a handful of pages?
It's not really the number of pages, it's whether you have a lot of media and really big files. So I wouldn't put video directly on the WordPress side. I'd be using some other, CDN or whatever. But let's just say you have a lot of media on the site. That's when Duplicator Pro might have some issues. The paid version has ways to account for that. You can actually exclude stuff. I think you can do this in the free version as well. So Duplicator Pro, what it does is it basically exports the database and the files, and then it just kind of automates that for you, so you can move it from one hosting provider to another. And it's another way to make backup of your site.
Awesome. Thank you.
I've noticed that when I've migrated a site to HTTPS, the SEO tanks a bit before it comes back up. Even with going into Search Console and setting everything up. Is that what you found as well? I mean, like around 3 to 4 months?
3 to 4 months, no. How big was the site?
Well, it's several sites, some small, some large.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, any change is going to create, you're going to see your traffic kind of drop and then come back up.